Hello everyone. Next presentation regarding biodiversity and its conservation at the high level. Biodiversity. Firstly, we have to be seeing the what is the biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity conservation refers to the protection, upliftment, and management of biodiversity in order to derive sustainable benefits for present and future generations. So these are the basic information or basic definition of biodiversity conservation. So conservation is the most important point. If we have to be going to do the conservation of this particular biodiversity, then it will be beneficial for our upcoming generation. The biodiversity conservation in that particular slide, the what is the number of parts which is to be major and important parts regarding biodiversity which is to be shown in slide. So these are the number of animals, birds, farms, plants, different level flowers is going to be also available, and different level trees also available. So this what is this particular what is biodiversity conservation? Biodiversity conservation is the protection and management of biodiversity to obtain resource for sustainable development. And this biodiversity conservation has number of objectives is going to be also available. First objective is to preserve the diversity of species. Second one is sustainable utilization of species and ecosystem. Third one is to maintain life supporting systems and essential ecological processes. Biodiversity and its conservation. Bio means life and diversity means variety. The definition again, biodiversity is defined as the variety and variability among all groups of living organisms and the ecosystem in which they occur. Classification of this diversity is, first one is genetic diversity, second species diversity, and third one is community or ecosystem diversity. Biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity conservation is about saving life on earth in all its forms and the keeping natural ecosystem functioning and healthy. Conservation is of two kinds. First one is in situ conservation and second ex situ conservation. In situ conservation, the conservation of species in their natural habitat is considered the most appropriate way of conserving biodiversity. Conserving the areas where populations of species exist naturally is an underlying conditions for the conservation of biodiversity. So that's why protected areas form a central element of any nation strategy to conserve biodiversity. A protected area is a geographically defined area that is designated or regulated and managed to achieve specific conservation objectives. It may be set aside and all over for the protection of biological diversity and of natural and associated cultural resources, and is managed through legal or other effective means. This includes national parks and nature reserves, that is sustainable use reserves, that is biospheres, then wilderness areas and heritage sites. Again, conservation of biodiversity, it is defined as the different level available. Conservation is defined as the management of human use of the biosphere so that it may be yield the greatest sustainable benefit to represent generation while maintaining its potential to meet the needs and aspiration of future generations. So, given the value and importance of biodiversity, there is a great need to conserve the ever threatened organism, and some of the international agencies play a crucial role in involving the conservation strategies. So some amount of short forms which is to be available regarding conservation of biodiversity is as shown in particular slides. Biodiversity conservation strategy. So that is Earth summits in June 1992 at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and Convention on Biological Diversity. Conservation of biodiversity, a common concern of humankind. So these are the biodiversity and its conservation method shown in particular slide. Regarding strategies of biodiversity conservation have all the varieties of food, plants, livestock, microbes and agriculture animals should be conserved. Why should we conserve biodiversity? So it is believed that the area with higher species abundance has a more stable environment compared to an area with lower species abundance. We can further claim the necessity of biodiversity by considering our degree of dependency on the environment. We depend directly on various species of plant for our various needs. So similarly, we depend on various species of animals and microbes for different reasons. Biodiversity is being lost due to the loss of habitat. So over exploitations of resources, climate changes, then pollutions, then invasive exotic species, diseases, hunting, etc. Since it provides us with several economic and ethical benefits and add aesthetic value, it is very important to conserve biodiversity. Again, this is the conservation of biodiversity. The Convention of Biological Diversity held in June 1992 that is stressed the need of conservation of biodiversity for sustainable development and perpetuation of human being on earth. The conservation is defined as the management of human use of the biosphere so that it may yield the greatest sustainable benefit to the present generation while maintaining in its potential to meet the needs and aspiration of the future generations. The two basic approaches to wildlife conservation in protected habitat are first one is in situ conservation and second one is ex situ conservation. So these are the basically biodiversity refers to the variety of life on earth. It can be conserved in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. Whenever we're thinking about the in situ conservation, there is in situ conservation of biodiversity is the conservation of species within their natural habitat. In this method, the natural ecosystem is maintained and protected. And whenever thinking about ex situ conservation, there is also ex situ conservation of biodiversity involves the breeding and maintenance of endangered species in artificial ecosystem such as zoos, nurseries, botanical gardens, genetic banks, etc. So there is a less competition of for food, water, and space among the organism. Conservation of biodiversity, including the integrity and the diversity of genus, species, and ecosystem, and their evolutionary potential. Sustainable use of biological resources in such a manner and at such rates that does not lead to the long-term decline of the diversity, thereby maintaining its potential to meet the needs and aspirations of present and future generations. So equity in conservation and use, including equitable access to biological resources and benefits arising out of the use of biological resources. In particular, in situ conservation in simply means conservation of species in its natural ecosystem or even in man-made ecosystem. This strategy emphasizes protection of total ecosystem through a network of protected area. Protected areas, an area of land sea specially dedicated to the protection and maintenance of biological diversity and managed through legal effective means. There are different categories of protected areas which are managed with different objectives. So these include biosphere reserve, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, etc. And present we have 11 major biosphere reserves, 80 national parks, 420 wildlife sanctuaries in our country, that is covering 4% of all our geographic area. The Jim Corbett National Park was first national park established in India, and that is what is the difference among biosphere reserves, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries. The examples of biosphere of biosphere reserve of India, which has to be shown in number of categories, first, second, and third. We have to be seen that particular examples which is to be available in Kerala, Sri Lanka, Rajasthan. Okay, then next, in that particular in situ conservation has several advantages. The following number of important advantages of in situ conservation have. First one is it is a cost effective and convenient method of a conservation conserving biodiversity. Second one is a large number of living organisms can be conserved simultaneously. Next, since the organisms are in the natural ecosystem, they can evolve better and can easily adjust to different environmental conditions. In that particular in situ conservation, the certain protected areas when in situ conservation takes place include national park, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserve, which has to be already seen. The first point is in situ conservation is national parks. These are small reserves maintained by the government. Its boundaries are well sanctuared, and human activities such as grazing, forestry, habitat, and cultivation are prohibited. For example, Kahana National Park, and also these are which these are available in the location of Bandipur. Whenever we're thinking about the ex situ conservation, ex situ conservation of biodiversity involves the breeding and maintenance of endangered species in artificial ecosystems such as zoos, nurseries, botanical gardens, gene banks, etc. So there is less competition for food, water, and space among the organism. Ex-situ conservation has following advantages. The first one is the animal are provided. Whenever we going before we going to advantages of ex-situ conservation, firstly we have to be see the definition. It is defined as the conservation of component of biological diversity, the sample of genetic diversity, particularly of endangered species outside their natural habitats. It involves maintenance and breeding of endangered plant and animal species under partially or fully controlled conditions. For example, zoos, botanical gardens, aquaria, nurseries, DNA banks, seed banks, genetic banks, etc. There are more than 15,000 botanical gardens in the world containing more than 80,000 species. So there are more than 800 zoos around the world with about 3,000 species of mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. In India, we have many genetic banks. The important ones are National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, that is NBPGR, in New Delhi. Agriculture and horticultural crops and their wild varieties are preserved by cryopreservation of seeds, which has to be in liquid nitrogen pollen etc. at 196 degree Celsius. National Facility for Plant Tissue Culturability Responsibility. Whenever we thinking about the advantages of ex situ conservation, there are one one of them, the animal are provided with a longer time and breeding activity. Second one is the species bred in captivity can be reintroduced in the wild. And third one is genetic techniques can be used for the preservation of endangered species. It has been set up of the development of facility of conservation of varieties of crops, plants, trees by issue culture. What is the goal of conservation? Conservation efforts focus on protecting entire ecosystem as well as single species. So protecting an ecosystem will ensure that the natural habitats and the interactions of many different species are preserved at the same time. The conservation challenges is protecting resources for the future can require people to change the way they earn their living today. So, conservation regulations must be informed by solid research and must try to maximize benefits while minimizing economic costs. Conservation strategy at local level is as per rule the 23 circle of KSBB, all the local bodies should form biodiversity management committees, that is BMCs, within this its area. It is an arrangement that works in coordination with the three tiers pan- Panchayat Raj system uh, as per the existing regulations. So, preparation of people biodiversity register is the immediate task of BMCs. So, value of this biodiversity, there are direct and indirect economic, aesthetic, and scientific reasons of preserving biodiversity. So, direct economic value is humans depends on plants and animals to provide food, clothing, energy, again medicine and shelter. Genetic diversity in species that might be needed in the future is important because most of the world's food crops come from just a few species. Second, wild species serves as reservoirs of desirable genetic traits that might be needed to improve domestic crop species, so disease and insect resistances. Again, many of the medicines that are used today are derived from plants or other organisms. Then scientists continue to find new extracts from plants and other organisms that help in the treatment of human disease. Next, however, many species of organisms are yet to be identified, especially in remote regions of Earth. So, their usefulness in providing extracts or useful genes is unknown. Why should we protect biodiversity? The reasons behind this protection of diversity is medicinal, second agriculture, third commercial, fourth ecological, and fifthly ethical or aesthetics. In particular, medicinal, the 40% of modern medicines come from plants, animals, fungi. 95% of non-plant species have never been tested for medicinal value. Value of biodiversity, which has to be shown in earlier. Then next, why should we protect biodiversity? Again, first for the medicinal, second one is agriculture. 80,000 non-edible plants on the planet. We depend on 20 species to provide 90% of global food supply. Corns, rice, and wheat are 50% alone. Loss of biodiversity in agriculture, that is apple. 40,000 apple cultivars in North America have been reduced to 11, which supply 90% of our supply. Coffee. 28% decline in Latin American production as climate change has brought new rainfall and pest patterns. Third, commercial. Fourth, ecological. Fifth, ethical and aesthetic, which has to be shown in the number of pictures is available in our slides. Why biodiversity is important? The natural environment is the source all our resource for life. Environmental processes provide a wealth of services to the living world, providing us with air to breathe, water to drink, and food to eat, as well as materials to use in our daily lives and natural beauty to enjoy. Complex ecosystem with a wide variety of plants and animals tend to be more stable. A highly diverse ecosystem is a sign of healthy system since all the interest and the interests of future generations to conserve biodiversity and our resources. The benefits and services provided by ecosystem includes the number of points is important in biodiversity. First one is generation of soils, second maintenance of soil equality, third maintenance of air equality, next maintenance of water equality, next pest control, next detoxification and decomposition of waste, next pollination, next crop production, next climate stabilization, next prevention and mitigation of natural disasters, next provision of food security, next provision of health care, that is including medicines, next income generation, and last one is the spiritual and cultural values. Strategies of KSBB for biodiversity conservation. Appropriate action plan is also formulated for each strategy. There is the strategy number 1: maintain the topographic features of the state to reduce the loss of biodiversity. Second, documentation of the biodiversity and its traditional use. Next, conservation of biodiversity, rich areas outside the protected areas. Next, build up a strong database on the forest diversity of the state. Next, conservation of ecosystem, that is species and genetic pools. The number of contents, there is the prevention of habitat fragmentation and maintenance of habitat continuity. Next, mitigation of human wildlife conflicts. Next point is establish a model for sustainable utilization of resources for livelihood and the equitable benefits. Next point is important, that is the prevention of over exploitations and encroachments also. Ensure sustained availability of raw material for indigenous food and medicines. Again, protect and promote biodiversity in and around plantation. Ensure long-term conservation of select wetlands in the state. Prevention conservation of wetlands into any other land use and maintain their extent and ecological status. Sustainable utilization of wetland resources for the benefit of local community. And last, establish environmental flaws in each river basin. So these are the all our information regarding deep level conservation of biodiversity. Thank you.